Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and I just got back from the new film 12 Years a Slave. It's based on a true story. It's actually based on a book which is telling of the true story of Salman Norup, in this film played by Shwetel Ejiofor, who I'm sure I butchered his name and I apologize. He was a freedman in Saratoga, New York, when he's lured by two men to go and play violin. He's very good at violin. To go with them on a tour for various places, and then they kind of kidnap him and sell him into slavery, and he's stuck as a slave for 12 years. And this recounts that true story. Steve McQueen, the director of this film, and Shame, which are the only two films of his I've seen, unfortunately, but I think they share something very similar in that Steve McQueen, he's almost like an independent director, an arty director, where he's really taking a step back, where he's really removed from his subject. But the way he's telling the story, it almost feels like a prestige picture from the 1960s. Shame was basically a Hollywood message picture in a lot of what it was doing. And 12 Years a Slave is almost like a Hollywood epic, especially in its kind of stunt casting, where you have Michael Fassbender, Benedict Cumberbatch, Paul Dano, Paul Giamatti, Quezanine Wallace, Alfre Woodard, Brad Pitt. And it feels like a big epic. Like if this was in the 60s, you'd have a big trailer and it would list all the names and then go, one of the most acclaimed films of our time, although I think that might be in the TV ad soon, probably. When I watched this film, I think that worked a lot better in Shame than 12 Years a Slave, and I kind of wasn't sure about it, especially with the stunt casting. When I keep seeing different famous people in the roles, it kind of took me out of it a little, and it felt a little too Irwin Allen for me. It felt a little too NBC Sunday Night Movie. But I think that's kind of Steve McQueen's thing, really, is he's combining kind of being an artsy independent director with being a studio prestige director. But he wears it well. He wears it very well, in fact. It's showing slavery in a way that it was a business, and in a very cold business way, but it's also showing it in a very uncompromising way, a way that you have to deal with it, a way where you're not just showing them getting whipped a little bit, you're seeing them savagely getting whipped. This has a lot in common with something like Roots, where Roots really wanted to show you how it was and what really happened, and 12 Years a Slave is kind of like that. It really wants you to be confronted with this, but the whole way he produced it, it still feels like a studio epic. I really understand why this is getting so much, Oscar talk and things like that. And maybe, I'm reviewing this and it has just come out, and I'm not demoting it or anything. I'm not saying it makes it a worse film, and I'm not judging it because of that. But it makes sense because big studio epics were what used to be up for the Oscars. That used to be the big Oscar movie, were big studio epics where the studio really cared about the subject matter. They did it for the art. I mean, they kind of did it for the money, but they say they did it for the art. 12 Years a Slave is kind of like that, like a Gone with the Wind type big production, but just done in this artsier way, in this more removed, colder way, but also a confrontational with the audience way. Steve McQueen, I think, really did know how to do that. I guess my complaints with it almost feeling like that came in contrast with itself, like it was a bad marriage of styles, especially at the beginning with Cumberbatch and Dano, and when Paul Giamatti shows up, it felt really like too much with those guys. It was like hitting me with all these famous people, and I see a lot of movies, so famous movie stars don't really affect me usually, but it did in this, and it made me kind of go, like, what's going on? It feels like they stunt casted the crap out of this. This isn't Machete Kills. Like, this is 12 Years a Slave. What's going on? But then when he gets to the plantation that Fassbender is the owner of, that all went away. There is kind of a long segment of the film when he's first put into slavery that does feel like that, and it feels a little odd. Steve McQueen does get it to work, but it just feels a little unnatural to me. After he's on Fassbender's plantation, that goes away, except for when Brad Pitt shows up in the end in probably one of the most self-serving roles. Brad Pitt's a producer on this film, and judging by the role he picked, he certainly thinks a lot of himself. I like how Steve McQueen does that, because I think a lot of directors now want to be directors of the moment. They're kind of looking back, but Steve McQueen is someone who I think he likes the 50s and 60s a lot. He likes how things got a little independent in Hollywood and how you had United Artists. He also likes being a modern director as well and melding those styles. He kind of is doing things similar to Django, in that it's melding styles together, but he's doing it in a much subtler way. If you're not familiar with those older films, you probably wouldn't know that at all. Although there are all this stunt casting and big names and everything, there's still a lot of great performances from Gisriel as, I'm screwing up his name, as Solomon or Plot. He was amazing, and he's really the through line through it, especially when you're going through it. Almost feels a little episodic, especially during those segments with Benedict Cumberbatch's plantation, and then before that with Paul Giamatti selling him. It does feel a little more episodic. You can tell it's withering him down. He's slowly being broken as a man the longer he's in slavery. When you have an actor and he is really central to the ongoing narrative of the film, they're as much a storyteller as the director is. And I definitely think that as Gisriel Ejiofor's performance in this film is definitely like that. He's really telling the story. He's really being a storyteller in this film. He's really expressing something. The film wouldn't work without him. He's as essential to the quality of the film as Steve McQueen is. It's a very integral performance in this film. Michael Fassbender is just a great actor. He's a very evil plantation owner, but he doesn't get so caught up in doing it in a simple way. This film doesn't really portray anybody in a very like good or bad, simplicity way, even though you can get wrapped up in it, especially with an issue like slavery, but he is smarter about that. Michael Fassbender knows the kind of style that Steve McQueen wants. Certainly he's worked with him on all his films. He's really good at playing an antagonist. His performance as Magneto as well. He gives a kind of a full person as a villain, you know, as an antagonist. He feels like an antagonist, but he doesn't at the same time. It's very interesting. Everyone else, I did like Paul Dano and I like Benedict Cumberbatch, and everyone did a good performance, even if I did think they're a little too stunty and it showed just a bit too much. It's a very well acted film, and Steve McQueen's always very good with actors, much like all those older prestige films. I'm not trying to say this is a worse film because of any of that. It's a very intense film, it's a very interesting film, and it really makes you deal with slavery in a way I think a lot of filmmakers would really be scared to deal with. Steve McQueen really wants to confront you with it, that they could just take a free man and do this to himself. The racism was that insane in this film, you know. When I watched it, I kept thinking about like, but he's free. You can't do that to someone. But then I also thought, well, you can't do that to the other people either. How rampant racism was, how inspired they all felt to be doing these things. You know, Fassbender even brings up that there's scripture that says they can do all this, and it's very, very disturbing. But that was really the way it was for a long time, and how this country was really built, unfortunately. We really confronted with it in the way this film is doing. I think the thing with historical films that Steve McQueen directs this very well is that, and I complain about it all the time, is that you wouldn't adapt a real life story the way you'd adapt a book, and oftentimes you're leaving in information that is holding back the narrative, and Steve McQueen doesn't do that, or at least if he put in information, he got it to work. This film moved very well. I wasn't thinking about length. I didn't think it was too long. I actually was surprised how well it paced it was. This film is directed in a very interesting way, and I almost wish I could see it twice before reviewing it, because the way he reviews it in such like a cold, distant way, but in such a confrontational way, while also doing the studio thing, he wants you to understand that this is the attitude at the time, the attitude of the people who are enslaving these people, but it's also like doesn't not have it have a human face as well. As much as it is kind of an Oscar-y prestige picture, it doesn't lose its balls and all of that. It has the intensity that it needs to have. 12 Years a Slave is really the 2013 version of what used to be an Oscar picture, but it doesn't kind of lose its majesty in doing that. So if you have seen 12 Years a Slave and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.